Hello everyone, a very warm welcome to our webinar today for counsellors from all across the EU. This is the third in a series, a mini-series of webinars, and today we are going to cover the changes in terms of fees for European students and also financing your study in the UK. A very warm welcome to all of you, and I'm very pleased to be joined today by three speakers who are representing universities in the UK and who will be able to share with you all the important information for studying in England, in Scotland and in Wales. So joining me today, we have Mikaela Green, who is the Student Recruitment Officer for Europe at the University of Derby. And she will come first and she will be able to tell you everything you'd like to know about the new rules on fees and how universities support European students. We will then hear from Robbie Willis, who's Head of Global Operations at the University of Edinburgh, and he's also Chair for the Scottish Universities Inclusion Group. And he will talk specifically about Scotland within the UK and how Scottish universities support European students. And then we will hear from Sara Stephens, who's Senior Market Development Manager for Universities Wales, and she will be looking at Wales within the UK and how the Welsh university system supports European students. And then after those three presentations, there will be plenty of time for all of your questions. We've collected a few questions beforehand already, but please put all of the questions you have into the questions box. If they're really super straightforward, we'll go to your questions straight away and we'll be able to answer them. But anything that's a little bit more detailed and needs a bit more information, we'll come to after the presentations. But please make good use of the questions box. Could I also please ask you to be as concise as possible and as to the point, because obviously it's a bit, if the questions are too long, it makes it a bit difficult for me and for my lovely colleagues from British Council Spain going through the questions in good time. The session will be recorded, and we'll share the recording with all of you afterwards, and the slides will also be shared as soon as the webinar is finished, so you'll have all of the information from all of the slides after the webinar. You'll also be sent a feedback form, so anything you'd like to let us know about the webinar or about the series, then please do that in the feedback form. That's it really in terms of housekeeping, and you've seen the agenda here. Perhaps for those, I've seen many familiar faces, and I think many of you have joined other of our webinars before, but for those of you who are new to the British Council and have not joined any of our engagement activities across Europe, just a very brief introduction. We are the UK's cultural relations organisation. We are present in 24 countries. We have offices on the ground, education staff on the ground in 24 countries, and they are the countries in blue here on the map. We obviously also do a whole range of other things, and they're listed on the slide, but for you, really most importantly, there's education colleagues in offices in those countries, and if you need any information, you can obviously always turn to colleagues in those countries and you can discuss with them in country. I've listed here a few links, but I know my colleagues have also included relevant links for fees, for budgeting, a budget calculator, and also questions about the settlement scheme. So you'll have all of those links once we are finished with our slides. And this is just also a very brief outlook of what else we are going to do to support you and your work with European students going forward. And I just wanted to bring to your attention that we are going to have a promotional mail shot over the coming days where we are going to promote support packages and scholarships which UK universities are offering to European students for the upcoming academic year. So if you have signed up to our marketing services, which I know some of you have done as they registered for this webinar, then keep an eye out and you'll be receiving the information in an email very soon. And we also have a Facebook Live coming up for European students on the 2nd June. So that's also something you might want to share with your students. And that's an opportunity for students just to come to us and ask questions about immigration and fees and all of that. And Carolina, my colleague from British Council Spain, Jane, who you won't be able to see today, but she's in the background and answers questions. She will be chairing the Facebook Live and will be there for any of your student questions. That's it from me, and I'm very happy to hand over to my colleague Mikaela from the University of Derby now.
Thank you very much, Alma. Let me see if I can share my screen here.
That's all looking good. Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, let's see.
Just perhaps if you go into the presenters mode, yeah.
Super. Let me get it up on the main screen.
Yeah.
Hey, hi everyone. Thank you for bearing with me. So my name is Mikaela, and I am based in the East Midlands, in the Midlands of England, representing universities in England today. And I hope the weather is nicer where you are. It's pretty gloomy here, and we can't wait for some sunshine. So I originally moved to the UK in 2007 from Sweden, and I came to study at the university in England. And it really shows how lovely the process is and how welcoming it's been to still, for me, be here in England. And I recently applied for my settled status as well, which is something that we will be discussing today. And it's something that, if you know of someone who hasn't yet applied for pre-settled or settled status, to please do so before the deadline of 30th of June. So what has changed since 1st of January 2021? Well, we are now looking at two types of fees, typically, which will be either the UK, the home fees, or the overseas international fees. And the home fees are still at £9,250 this coming academic year, whereas the international fees can vary between university to university. The UK government is firmly committed to still provide a reciprocal basis in terms of the Irish citizens. So this includes the rights to home fees, to student finance and maintenance support, so that is based on meeting the same eligibility criteria as UK nationals. And this is part of the common travel arrangement. So worth looking up that if you are looking after someone who has an Irish nationality, for example, and hopefully, we will be able to look into other cases and more things will become clearer throughout the presentation. In terms of UK nationals, new or dual nationals, broadly speaking, those who live in EU countries will be eligible for home fees if they start their studies in the UK before 1st of January 2028. So there's a fair bit of criteria here that I can take you through at the moment. And what we are mainly referring to or referencing are criteria that's been released by Student Finance England or UKISA. So I will be providing you with those links in just a moment. So those starting a degree from 1st of August 2021 must be living in the EU, EEA, or Switzerland at 31st of December 2020 and either have lived in England immediately before moving there and have resided in the EU, EEA, Switzerland, UK, or Gibraltar at least the last 3 years before starting a course in the UK, or B, did not live in the UK immediately before living there and have lived in the EU, EEA, Switzerland, UK, or Gibraltar for at least 3 years before starting a course in England, or have lived continuously in the EEA, EU, Switzerland, UK, Gibraltar between 31st of December 2020 and start of the course. And lastly, the course starts before 1st of January 2028. So there is so much information about this, and we will repeat this later, or at least have the link for you so that you can go and have a look. With regards to the EU settlement scheme, some students may have already applied for the pre-settled status by now, and this means that they are able to remain in the UK for up to 5 years and then apply for the settled status. So the fee assessments are carried out by each institution individually. So in terms of proving UK or home fee status, many UK or many English universities are now asking for the share code. So if applicants are able to provide the share code, broadly speaking, the home fee status will be in place. So do check with each university individually is what I would recommend. Some universities have streamlined fees as well. I thought this would be useful to include, or they are honouring home fees. So again, very useful to check with each university if you are looking for a specific fee status. Also, this is a very useful graph that Student Finance England have put together, and it very clearly shows for EU students, so that you can have a look at what the nationality of residency might be, which is what I was explaining before, what the EU student could get, and how they should apply for this. So I've also included a QR code as well as the link on this slide to the EU 21N application form, which is the one that students can apply for if they have pre-settled status under the EU settlement scheme, and if they have lived in the UK or the EU, in the EEA, Gibraltar or Switzerland for 3 years before they start their course, which might be the case for many students that you speak to as well. So in terms of scholarships and bursaries and discounts, universities in England have traditionally had many scholarships and discounts in place for international students. And really, with after Brexit and due to the changes occurring, the majority of universities will now have a different offer as well for EU students to honour and to enable them to get through this transition period. So these might look like an EU scholarship. They might have the EU transition bursary as a name, a Vice Chancellor's EU scholarship, or just a variety of EU and international scholarships that are in place for a specific number of students. There you might come across hardship funds, and these are technically decided by universities themselves. It could be something like £1,000 towards living costs per year. And again, it's very useful to look at the criteria in this sense. Scholarships can also be decided if there is a specific alumni that has decided to donate, or if there are specific subjects in place. So for example, a business scholarship or a STEM scholarship. Typically, scholarships are merit-based, so they're based on academic achievement. They can have a separate application form, or they could be automatically assessed. You might also come across sport scholarships. So if someone is practicing a sport either at a regional, national or international level, then they could receive additional either tuition fee contributions or additional for various sport functions that they would be carrying out, or equipment or professional coaching. You may also come across early bird discounts, so if someone pays their fees before a specific date or even by enrollment. Also, what I would like to point out is that the British Council has kindly helped to collate information on EU scholarships that universities have got in place. So please take a look at that and you will find a more comprehensive list. What also has changed is the immigration route. So if this is primarily for students that do not have a pre-settled or settled status, or they are not Irish citizens, or they are not UK nationality passport holders or dual nationals. So this would be specifically to those that are coming from the EU with international fee status. And the immigration route is technically for students that are coming for a course that is longer than 6 months. This also can vary between universities in terms of the fees and the processes in place, but technically that is the basis of it. Visa, this allows for up to 20 hours of work, which is very useful as well to know, per week in term time, or in full time, it's official vacation periods. Deposits may or may not be required, again, depending on the university, and these would typically be paid before a student has sort of got to the stage where they are securing a CAS, a confirmation of acceptance for studies. And this will also be after they have an unconditional offer. So it normally is a student would obtain an unconditional offer. They would then be maybe paying a deposit, then to secure the CAS. This will depend. And then that is when they would start their visa process. So what's good is that EU nationals are on the list of low-risk countries and do not need to evidence maintenance funds. This is based on passport nationality. There is also a smartphone app that has been put in place called the UK Immigration ID Check. So this is to verify the identity. If someone is not able to use the app, then they will need to attend a visa application center. And there are a number of these already stated on the government's website. So another part, which is now part of the immigration also for EU students, is the immigration health surcharge. So this is an annual fee which has put in place to go towards the NHS health. So in order for students to be able to access the health services in the same way that a UK citizen would, or anyone else in the country. There is a possibility to apply for a partial, full, or full refund if a student fulfills the following criteria. They are in full-time education, they do not work, they have an EHIC card, and a visa which was issued 1st of January 2021 at the earliest, and these applications open from 1st of January 2022. So have a look at that website if you want to pass that information on to any students, or if you feel like that would be useful for someone to be aware of. Finally, before I share the resources, I wanted to just make you a little bit aware of the Turing Scheme. So plans have been put in place for the Turing Scheme, which will replace Erasmus Plus when the funding for that scheme has come to an end. And this is the UK's new global programme to study and work abroad. It is available for schools, for further education and vocational and educational training, and also higher education institutions. So this applies to students in any cycle or recent graduates up to 12 months after. It can be students that are studying full-time or part-time. They can then study in another university abroad or undertake international work experience. And every UK university has applied for funding for the scheme. The recent deadline was 16th of April 2021, so we will be looking to hear individually what the outcomes will be. But this is a very exciting scheme that we hope students will be taking part in when they are with us. So just to finish off, these are the resources that I would like to point you in the direction of. The UKISA Who Pays Home Fees is particularly interesting, as you'll be able to check especially which nationality, which residence someone might have, and then what the eligibility would be. The gov.uk has also got some really useful info for EU citizens on the new immigration points-based system. The Student Finance England FAQs are also incredibly helpful in terms of finding out more information on the various eligibility criteria. I will now hand over to Scotland.
Thank you so much, Mikaela. That was a great presentation and loads of details there. So I'm sure we'll come back to quite a bit of it. But without further ado, over to you, Robbie.
Well, hello, everybody. Hopefully you can see the first slide there on the screen. My name's Robbie Willis. I'm Head of Global Operations at the University of Edinburgh, but I'm wearing two hats today because I'm also the chair of the Scottish Universities International Group. So I'm going to speak on behalf of Scotland today. Mikaela's summary is very helpful in laying quite a kind of good coverage of the foundations of what applies to the United Kingdom, but there are some distinctive aspects to Scotland which I'd like to highlight and focus on. So just to provide a little bit of an introduction I'm just going to get that up onto the presentation. There we go, that should get us through. Yep, a bit of an introduction to the Scottish undergraduate degree. You will start to see a bit of distinctiveness to the Scottish education system, and at the undergraduate level, the main distinction is that many of our degrees are followed over 4 years rather than the 3 years that you might find across the rest of the UK. And that allows some flexibility and breadth at the start of the programme, followed by the specialisation and depth that comes later in the degree. So 4,500 different programmes offered across the Scottish universities, 19 universities with many joint degrees or interdisciplinary options. A very strong history of providing higher education across Scottish universities. 4 of the Scottish universities founded in the 14 and 1500s, including my own, all 4 of those in the world top 200, and we've got 7 Scottish universities in the world top 400 institutions, so second only to Switzerland in that respect per capita. So strong reputation and interest from around the world, including from across Europe in the Scottish universities. Applicants apply through UCAS, and we're very much supported by the Scottish Government in our mission to attract students to study with us across our universities, and the link there will take you to the scotland.org site with profiles of all the institutions. So when it comes to funding, what we would certainly find in the funding space is that the devolved nature of education to the Scottish Government and Scottish Parliament provides a different landscape for your students to consider. And until recently, because students in Scotland have their tuition fees covered by the Scottish Government, that was extended across Europe, and we attracted great interest from students across Europe to study with us, with their fees being covered at some of the world's top universities. But as we all know, unfortunately, in my view and many of my colleagues' views, that circumstance has been heavily interrupted by Brexit, and we would expect that most of the applicants that we see this cycle and into future cycles who are EU nationals based in the EU will be classified as international applicants, and therefore having an international tuition fee applied to their studies. So just to give some headlines there, and this is variable university to university and can create quite a big range. If your students are looking at those institutions, you might see tuition fees ranging from 12,000 up to potentially £30,000 sterling per year. And certainly for my own university, University of Edinburgh, annual tuition rates are between 20 and 30, so they're at the top end of that international tuition. So you can imagine that those that may still qualify for some funding will be interested to explore those avenues, and I'll cover that in a little bit more detail in the slides that are to come. In terms of living costs, we estimate the living costs will be between about £8,000 and £12,000 per year for students in Scotland, and that might be a little bit lower than some other UK locations, and certainly we would expect that to be lower than, for example, students studying in London. And some universities may fix their tuition, the tuition that the student starts with at the first year of their degree programme, and stick with that tuition throughout the years of their degree, Others may have the approach where the tuition fee rises year on year and is adjusted. So that's something certainly to look out for. In terms of tuition fees and fee status, I'm sure there are many of the students you're working with who are looking very closely and carefully at tuition fee status, especially if they're UK nationals who are living in the EU, or if they're students that have applied for and have successfully been granted pre-settled status. So the tuition fee status will indicate what level of fee would be charged should the student enter that particular university. And each individual university can make their own assessment of tuition fee status. And while all will be working to the same guidelines and most will come to the same conclusion, there can be differences in opinion for applicants based on the universities they've applied to and which fee status they're allocated towards. Now, those fee status decisions are normally made post-application. It's normally something that we do once someone has applied to us, but students can check in advance and have a view of the likely status. And most universities, and the link that I've provided there is the University of Edinburgh's link, can use a ready reckoner to work out what their likely or expected fee status might be. So in contrast to England and the rest of the UK, in Scotland, we have three potential fee status categories. We have the international fee status, which, as I said before, we expect most EU nationals resident in the EU to be allocated towards. But we have two further fee status categories. The first of which is the Scottish fee rate. And this would apply primarily to students who are resident in Scotland and have their funding entirely provided by the Scottish Government, dispersed through the Student Awards Agency, the Scottish Student Awards Agency. Very attractive proposition to have your fees fully covered. But we also have a third fee rate, and that would be the rest of the UK, often referred to as the RUK fee rate. Now, as Mikaela covered, that does include most of our applicants from the Republic of Ireland at the moment. So Irish students resident in Ireland generally allocated into the rest of UK rate. But interestingly, Irish nationals resident in the UK we would expect fall into the Scottish fee rate. So there are some variabilities there. Now, I think the two areas that certainly from the pre-questions and what might come up in the Q&A, where there is interest, certainly for the Scottish universities, is UK nationals who are living in the EU. Generally, just to provide a bit of guidance on that, if we've got UK nationals living in the EU who previously had lived in Scotland, we would expect them to be allocated into the Scottish fee rate. If we've got UK nationals living in the EU currently who previously lived in the rest of the UK, we would expect them to be allocated into the rest of UK rate for Scottish universities. We also do know that there's quite a number of UK nationals and the children of UK nationals who are in the EU, but who have never lived in the UK. And in those circumstances, we expect those applicants to fall into the rest of UK fee rate. Now, an area that's caused quite a bit of confusion, and one that I know you've been asking about in the pre-questions, is candidates who have applied for and been successful with their application to pre-settled or settled status within the UK, but don't live currently in the UK and are living in the EU. And that area has caused some confusion, and we've certainly seen that a number of Scottish universities have interpreted those circumstances differently. So, for example, at the University of Edinburgh, where we have candidates with those circumstances, we have been allocating them into the Scottish fee rate, but I know that other Scottish universities have interpreted that differently and are not necessarily allocating in that way. So for this year, 2021 entry, we are going to see probably some different decisions being made. Into 2021, I think we're going to see clarification of that, and with the settlement scheme applications closing in June, we will know that candidates have those circumstances ahead of their applications. One thing that I would say is that whether or not the university makes the allocation into a particular fee status category, that doesn't automatically mean that the funding will flow from the student loans bodies or the Student Awards Agency Scotland. So candidates may find that they're allocated the home fee status, Scottish or rest of the UK, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they'll get that funding from the awards agency. So with most candidates, we expect being international fee players. How have Scottish universities responded to that? Well, for 2021 entry, here we've got 4 examples of scholarships that are being provided by Edinburgh Napier, Strathclyde, Dundee and Stirling. All slightly different levels of funding applied, and in particular for Stirling, a very generous offer with a scholarship of £5,000 per year against the tuition fee and the potential for the final year, the 4th year of the programme, to be provided for free. So there are offerings across the Scottish universities out there for 2021 entry. Will they continue for 2022? Well, I did ask out to the sector to see whether anyone was in a position to provide confirmation of that, but I didn't get any firm responses to say that 2022 entry scholarships had been confirmed. So I think that's a check the website position. The other area that I think is of interest is the Scottish Government's offering and under the banner of the Surcharge scholarships. So the Scottish Government has a flagship scholarship scheme. It's been in operation for a number of years. It currently applies to postgraduate taught applicants from 6 countries globally, including the USA and Canada, India, Japan, and Pakistan. Those Surcharge scholarships are offered at the level of £8,000 for the master's programme. Now, we have been lobbying the Scottish Government to consider the inclusion of a European strand of the Surcharge scholarships, and in particular, we've been lobbying across the Scottish universities for that to extend to undergraduate students and meet the needs of those students who find themselves in very different circumstances. Given that we've just had an election in Scotland for the Scottish Parliament and a new government formed, we don't have further detail or announcement on that to date, but we are expecting to see developments in that area, and I personally am quite positive about how that's going to be extended into Europe and benefit students around Europe. So just, I think Mikaela covered quite a bit of this, so I'll not duplicate, but do encourage students to look locally for local schemes, trusts or charities that might support students in some way towards their studies. There may be sponsors, and certainly at the University of Edinburgh, this is the link to the sponsorship that we have coordinated with Coca-Cola that applies to a number of Eastern European nationals who might be applying to the University of Edinburgh. Students can work part-time as part of their visa arrangements if they require a visa, and those that don't require a visa will have more flexible working opportunities, and many of our students do work to assist with their finances. And the universities across the UK, including in Scotland, do have hardship funds in place for those students that find themselves in difficulty. So just a few resources to finish with and signposting. The first one being that there's quite a number of virtual open days happening across the next couple of weeks, really. There's quite a lot happening in June. Certainly at the University of Edinburgh, we have a virtual open day taking place at the end of June. Possibly far more accessible than previously for your students to consider attending these virtual open days, whereas physical travel might have caused them some limitations. So do take advantage of those. Study in Scotland through scotland.org has a lot of good resources, but probably the main one, if you're wanting to get into the granular detail, is the SAS, Student Awards Agency Scotland need to know Brexit pages, which have the latest in terms of the student funding arrangements for universities in Scotland. So that's my final slide. I think I'm going to be passing on to Sarah in Wales next. So thank you for your time, and I'll come back to you in the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Robbie. That was absolutely clear and really great. And I think we'll come back to some of the information you shared with us later in our Q&A. But let's move over to Sarah, who I can't see just yet, but I can see her lovely presentation and the Welsh mountains in the autumn, I think.
Okay, thank you. So Prynhawn Da from Wales. I'm
Do you want to, Sarah, sorry to interrupt, but do you want to share your camera as well with us?
Sorry, didn't realise. Is that better?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Now I can see you. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, so I'm Sara Stephens from Universities Wales. We represent the interests of all 8 universities in Wales. I work on the Global Wales Programme, a partnership between Universities Wales, the Welsh Government, the British Council and the Higher Education Funding Council for Wales. We work in key overseas markets, including the EU, and our activity ranges from marketing and recruitment to research and partnerships, and we also fund a number of scholarships. More on that in a moment. I'll now give you a brief overview of studying in Wales. Has my presentation moved on for you?
It hasn't yet.
Here we are.
Now it has. Now it has, yes.
Thank you. Yeah. So this slide really is a reminder that we are part of the UK, but we also have our government and our own parliament that passes laws. This means that in some cases, our rules in the field of education differ from England. However, for the purpose of today's presentation, you will see that the main rules that apply for EU students coming to study in Wales are more often aligned with England than not. So where are we? Wales is here to the west of the UK. We're about 2 hours from London by train, from South Wales, 3 hours from North Wales. You can fly into Cardiff Airport, or many of our international students fly into Manchester, Birmingham or London airports and then travel onwards into Wales. This map shows where our 8 universities are located. As you can see, they cover the length of Wales. The southern area is where our major cities are, and then the west and the north are more rural and consist mainly of larger towns rather than cities. We have 8 independent universities, all with a distinctive offer. They are Bangor, Cardiff, Aberystwyth, Trinity St David, Swansea, Cardiff Met, University of South Wales and Wrexham Glyndŵr. I've included some images here. Just this one highlights that 25% of the country is covered by national parks, but it's not all countryside. Here's Cardiff, the capital city, where 3 of our universities are based. And we also have some of the oldest universities in the UK. This one is Aberystwyth University. Excuse me. So why consider Wales? We have short degrees, 3-year bachelors, 1-year masters, 3-year PhDs. Cost in terms of international tuition fees start at around 11,000 per year, that are typically between 11,000 and 20,000 depending on the course. But there's also living costs, of course. Wales boasts some of the lowest living costs in the UK. For example, a month's rent in Wales can sometimes be the equivalent of a week's rent in London. Wales is famous for its warm welcome and close communities, and Welsh universities continue to have high student satisfaction rates and the highest student continuation rates in the UK. Students will have access to the National Health Service, and this includes free prescriptions. We have low crime rates and high quality of life. So some information about the application process. We would say the best way best route to coming is to find out which university offers the course the student is interested in, finding out about the course fees and living costs, and then contacting their counsellors or the country champion of that university directly to get more information. Entry requirements will vary depending on the level of study, the course they're interested in, and their English language proficiency. Now, in terms of fees, my colleagues Mikaela and Rob have already gone over some of this, but just to reiterate, there is a range of scenarios for EU students depending on when they arrive in the UK and the academic year that their course starts. So if you're an EU national and have settled or pre-settled status, you will benefit from lower tuition fees and access to student loan funding. But the application deadline for the EU settlement scheme is 30th of June this year, but you must have started living in the UK by 31st of December 2020. However, for those subject to international fees, so those arriving after January 2021 and starting a course this autumn, the amount will depend on the type of degree and will vary between institutions. As I said, we advise EU students to reach out to the universities they're interested in with specific questions on international fee levels for the degree they have in mind. Students will also need to apply for a student visa if studying a course for longer than 6 months. It's useful to highlight here that the graduate route will be available to those who have completed the degree, an undergraduate or a master's at an UK higher education institution, and that will allow them to stay for 2 years or 3 years for PhD graduates, for them to work at any skill level after graduation. And then they may switch into a work route visa if they find a suitable job. I've included the web address for studentfinancewales.co.uk there, so there's plenty of information available on that website. So on to scholarships. As I mentioned earlier, our universities will have their own scholarships available. And for example, some of our universities currently offer generous scholarships for EU students joining this academic year, 2021-2022. Those who are classified as international students will automatically be awarded a scholarship worth up to £5,000. But I also just wanted to highlight this new Global Wales Postgraduate Scholarship Programme, which offers £10,000 as a tuition fee discount to study a postgraduate programme at a Welsh university. Now, this is available for students from the EU and some other countries. You will see there the US, Vietnam and India. The Welsh Government has announced further funding for the Global Wales programme until 2026, so keep an eye out for more scholarships that will become available. And before I finish, I just wanted to briefly mention the mobility programmes. So despite us not being able to take part in the Erasmus Plus programme, the Turing Scheme, as you know, is available for students from the UK to go abroad next academic year. However, we have more good news in that Wales has launched its own mobility programme worth £65 million towards learning exchanges between Wales and countries of the EU and further afield. And compared to Turing, this is reciprocal. So there will be opportunities for students, of around 10,000 students and young people to come to study in Wales. So further information about that programme will be available soon. So that's it from me. Thank you for listening. Diolch.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was a fantastic presentation, and I really like the Welsh as well. It's always so lovely to hear. So thank you for spoiling us with that too. Thank you, everyone, and also thank you for your questions. There are quite a number of questions around scholarships, and then obviously passport holders, British residents in EU countries, specific questions in relation to Scotland. So I will try my best and share those amongst our panelists. But before I do that, let me turn my camera on, and if my panelists want to join me, that would be great. If perhaps just a few words around scholarships. So Robbie and Mikaela and Sara have all shared information around scholarships, and you will have a good sense that actually there is a huge range around. I mean, the universities offer a lot. Scotland, the nations of the UK offer their own national scholarship schemes. So there's a range of scholarships, and most of it is for this academic year, so much we know for sure, but there will also be new scholarships, new support packages, and existing ones for the coming academic years. There is much fluidity around scholarships as well, and so there isn't one permanent home for all of this information. What we found works best if we sort of flexibly and whenever there's a good moment, share the information as comprehensively as we can with students and counsellors across EU countries. So I would really, really recommend signing up to our marketing office, where we share the information, going to the university web pages, and really going through the detailed information you will find there, and getting in touch with Scotland Now and Global Wales and the national campaigns to see what's available at the national level. But I can promise you it's always going to be much more than you expect, and possibly also much more than you might know from the countries where you are based. It really is a very comprehensive offer. And I should also add that obviously in terms of English-speaking countries, the UK is still comparatively a relatively cheap study market. I mean, if you compare with the United States, Australia, and so on, I mean, then in terms of quality offer and fees that need to be paid, it obviously does quite well. It compares well. So much from me on scholarships and fees. I'd like to get to my first question, which is British citizens living in EU countries, and perhaps that's one, Mikaela, which you would be able to answer just very briefly. You've all touched upon it, but just if you could summarise again. So if we have a UK passport holder who lives in an EU country, has applied for this academic year, will be in the EU country until the course starts, will he or she have the right to home fees?
Yes, they will, because it is part of the Brexit's temporary course offer. So yeah, they will do.
And there shouldn't be any issue with any of the universities in the UK. That's something they will all equally allocate home fee status to that UK passport holder.
Yeah, the UKISA advice has been shared, and all universities should now be aware of that.
That's great. That's really good to hear. And there's in relation to that, there's obviously also the question around EU students with settled or pre-settled status who are not currently in the UK, perhaps because of pandemic and so on, who are in their EU home countries, but they have settled or pre-settled status. Will they have access to home fees and student loans when they start their course in the UK this autumn?
Broadly speaking, again, it is a yes, but they will have to check with each individual university and make sure that they provide the share code or the letter of evidence to say that they have either pre-settled or settled status. It's just like Robbie mentioned earlier, there has been some confusion caused between universities where one fee has been allocated and another one has been allocated, and I think it's just a matter of continuously conversing with that university. I work very closely with our admissions department, and we've had to, double check and then send back and then reassess. But in the end, it's turned out okay. So just make sure that you communicate with the university.
That's great. Thank you so much. And related to that, if a student hasn't got their pre-settled status confirmed yet, but they've applied for it, should they apply for the student loan, or should they wait until they've had their pre-settled status confirmed?
Yeah, so actually what they need is the share code. So Yes, so in order to apply for the student loan, they do need to have a share code, which they will be allocated once they have received the pre-settled status, for example.
So they need to wait for the status to be confirmed, really, before they
can. As far as I'm concerned, yes, yes.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's great. Do you know? Would you know? Perhaps not. How long it takes for the pre-settled status to be confirmed?
It has varied actually greatly, and it depends a little bit on if they ask for more information. I know when I applied for my settled status, I heard of people that got it within 24 hours, but it took me 2 weeks because they asked for further evidence. So it should be fairly quickly, but obviously now there's a fair bit of backlog, especially with all the people that have been applying in the last sort of few months. So I would just say, you know, get it in there as soon as possible and don't delay it.
That's great. That's all really helpful. Thank you so much, Mikaela. I move on to the Scotland part. Robbie, you were extremely clear in terms of allocation of fees and the 3 different fee categories for Scotland. There was a question if what you described around the allocation of fees, if that's the case for the University of Edinburgh, or will that be the same across all Scottish universities?
Yeah,
I think the
important thing to say around that is that all universities are working to the same guidelines. So we are looking to interpret policy and guidelines, and we're all working to the same. But there can therefore be variation if those guidelines are not written definitively, and there certainly are interpretations around particularly those students that might be have been successful for an application for settled status but who are not resident in the UK and won't be before the start of their degree programme. And there, I think, as many of the councillors will be aware, there were students who took the opportunity to come briefly to the UK at the end of last year, and that has enabled them to apply for pre-settled status. And I think that was a circumstance that the policy and guidelines didn't necessarily anticipate, and therefore it's vague on that front, and the residency aspects of that are not definitive, and therefore universities are having to make their own decisions. Certainly, for, as I said in my introduction, for the University of Edinburgh, we're interpreting that as these candidates having the home fee status applied to them, and that's what generally has been the case for us, but it's not been the case for some others, and it may not be the case that the Student Awards Agency Scotland follows up to agree with the home status that's been applied by a particular university. So it is complex, it is confusing, but I think it's been thrown up by what was an unanticipated approach that some families and students have taken, and taken a great opportunity to test the system. And I think that's what we're dealing with in this particular area and circumstance. Now, there does seem to be quite a few students that have put themselves in that position. So it's not at all an isolated circumstance, and that's why we're having to respond to it at this stage. But I do think into next year that will be clarified, and that will be much clearer for both applicants and the institutions that are applying those judgments and decisions. So for the next cohort, that should be clarified by the institutions.
That's really good. That's really helpful. Thank you. You've also mentioned the student loans, the Scottish Student Loans Company again, and I think in your presentation you mentioned that it can happen that a student is classified as Scottish, as home status in that sense, but then rejected by the loans company. Was that understood in the right way? So someone has asked what happens if that's the case, if there's this discrepancy between the university status and then the student loan status.
Yeah, no, good follow-up question, and I think it's not a circumstance that would happen often, but it can, and I think it probably will for a number of candidates this year. And in those circumstances, it then is going to be the responsibility of the student and their family to cover the costs that have been applied. So if the institution has conducted fee status and placed that student in the Scottish fee rate, The annual tuition fee is just short of £2,000. Student Awards Agency Scotland will normally cover that, but if they don't, then the student and their family will need to cover that amount, which is obviously a lot less than the international fee and also the rest of the UK fee. Equally, if the rest of the UK tuition was allocated and the loan company was not in agreement with that assessment, the student and their family would need to make considerations as to whether they could cover it themselves. But again, they have the advantage of not being placed in the international category, which would probably be potentially double that amount. So I don't think this is going to be a particularly common circumstance, but it can happen. Just want to flag that because it's an interpretation of guidance that has, is being tested for the first time, that we may have those outcomes.
That's great, and it's obviously to do with universities and the awarding body being different institutions. So that's where the discrepancy comes from. There's another question. Hang on, let me. What is the rest of the UK fee, please, Robbie? If you could just remind.
Yeah, so that's the same as the tuition fee. We match it to the tuition fee that applies to universities in the rest of the UK. So it's at £9,250 for next academic year. So it's common to that fee.
So essentially, like what we know as the home fee for in the rest of the UK. Yeah,
exactly.
That's great. Thank you so much. I can't see any other questions that are coming in. So it seems we've been comprehensive. We've answered everyone's questions. If there's anything else to all of the councillors out there in the various EU countries, then obviously please do get in touch with us, get in touch with my colleagues in Wales, Scotland, England. You can get in touch with me or my British Council colleagues. And we are obviously very happy to help with any information going forward. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll be in touch again in future. Thank you all. Have a good afternoon.